I woke at 3 a.m. to a voice that turned my bones to ice. The meds are making her confused. Tomorrow I'll get her committed. Then I just need to get rid of my wife and all that money is ours. Water hissed in the bathroom down the hall like a snake that had finally decided to show its fangs. I stood in the dark pulse, ticking loud in my ears, and felt a thought strike like a match. There are surprises a man never expects during his morning shower. But before I tell you what waited in the steam, you need to know how a simple prescription opened the door for a predator to walk straight into my life. 3 months earlier, Dr. Morrison changed my blood pressure medication. The first week I moved through rooms like a storm-battered ship, clipping my knee on the coffee table, setting down my mug, only to forget where it had sailed off to 5 minutes later. I checked the stove twice, then a third time. I put a hand on the door to make sure the deadbolt kissed the frame. Normal adjustment, he promised, and he was right. By the end of 2 weeks, the fog thinned and then lifted. But Brandon, my son-in-law, with the polished smile and a surgeon's way of cutting his steak, decided the fog was forever, or pretended to. Over dinner, he lowered his voice into practiced concern. "Mom's really declining fast," he told my daughter Sarah, the nurse, with a tender heart and a spine forged by 12-hour shifts. These cognitive declines can progress incredibly quickly at her age. We should research memory care before this gets worse. Sarah took my hand and asked if I felt okay. Brandon patted her shoulder like a benevolent shepherd. I watched his performance and remembered the first rule my late husband Frank taught me for surviving a wolf: count his teeth before you count his words. By the 3rd week, my head was clear as a bell, but Brandon had discovered a better instrument than truth paper. He greeted Sarah each evening with a fresh bulletin. I'd left the stove on, I'd wandered the yard in a nightgown at 2 a.m. I'd forgotten to latch the back gate. None of it was true. He documented what didn't happen, as if it had building a neat file of invented decline, while Sarah, hollowed by double shifts, let him knead her shoulders and talk softly about safety. I recognized the rhythm Frank had warned me about during his 25 years as a detective, the drumbeat of manufactured urgency that pushes good people toward the choice a predator already picked. One Tuesday night, my bladder pushed me downstairs at 2:47 a.m. The house sighed the way old houses do, and Brandon's voice drifted from the kitchen in the careful whisper of conspirators who believe the walls are loyal. He named a Dr. Peterson and a timeline. A hearing on Thursday morning. After I was deemed incompetent, he'd petition for full control of my finances. Then came the number that made my pulse stutter: a life insurance policy worth $2.3 million, plus the house Frank left me and the savings Sarah didn't know I had, because her father and I wanted our girl to build her life with her own hands. Brandon laughed about Florida, a beach house, and the relief of being rid of a bathrobe-wrapped burden. Institutions, he said, were notorious for unfortunate accidents, and a sudden decline would look natural. I stood in the dark hall and understood that a man had drafted the blueprint for my disappearance, while my daughter slept upstairs believing he was protecting me. Grief burned through me first, then rage, then something colder and more useful: a plan. Predators are bold because they trust 2 things: your fear and their invisibility. Brandon thought I was fumbling through a permanent winter. He didn't notice that I had started counting his footsteps, timing his calls, watching his hands. He liked to unlock his phone in front of mirrors and windows, 4 easy taps with the confidence of a man who thinks no one is looking. You could see the date reflected in glass if you knew to look. Of course it was his birthday. Men who build empires on other people's lives often build their locks out of their own initials and anniversaries. At 6 a.m., his alarm sang through the wall. He hummed that little victory tune in the kitchen, and he stepped into the shower for the long, luxurious half-hour he gave himself every morning. Steam curled against the hallway mirror. I picked up his phone and entered the 4 numbers I'd watched a dozen times. The screen opened like a mouth that could no longer hold its secrets. His call log glowed with late-night conversations labeled D. Peterson. I photographed the list each time, each duration. Then the messages, package delivered as promised. She should be properly confused within 72 hours of first dose. Excellent, Sarah is working double shifts. Won't notice. Another thread scrolled into view emergency commitment papers. Already filed a hearing slated for Thursday at 10 a.m. A sympathetic judge he thought would sign off in a 6-month window before the other matter. I stole every word with my camera and tucked them into the quiet safety of my own device. When Brandon sauntered in with a towel at his waist and an expensive tie in his hand, he performed concern with virtuoso ease. How was I feeling? Any confusion, any dizziness, I blinked, as if hesitant. Some days are better than others. He patted my shoulder. Under his palm, my skin went cold with fury I did not show. Sarah blew through late for another shift, kissed the air near our cheeks, and asked Brandon to watch me. He wrapped her waist, promised he would then slid a brochure across the table after the door closed, smiling seniors' bright rooms and involuntary commitment policies in tiny print. He talked about structure and specialized activities, immediate medical care and safety. I let my hands tremble. If you both think it's truly for the best, I said, and watched the feral glint flash in his eyes, the way a knife flashes when the curtain lifts. Rest, he told me. I climbed the stairs to Frank's photo, the one where his mouth is stubborn with a smile, and whispered, "Teach me one more time." Then I dialed the only person who would move as fast as I needed, Ray Collins, Frank's former partner, retired in years, never in instincts. By mid-morning, we had a meeting. By noon, the first rope of the trap was tied. By 8 a.m. on Wednesday, rain streaked down the windows and left maple leaves plastered against the pavement like wet stamps. Brandon announced errands, kissed the air near my cheek, and drove off with the confidence of a man who thought his victory already notarized. The moment his taillights disappeared, I slipped into Frank's old windbreaker, tucked the cache of photos into my purse, and left by the back door. I had perhaps 3 hours before he returned for lunch, and every minute mattered. The First National Bank sat just 2 miles away, the same red brick branch where the tellers still greeted longtime customers by name. Frank used to call it sleep insurance the way he diversified our accounts, so no single crisis could pull the rug out from under us. I moved funds through the quiet routes he'd set up years before, opened a new account under tighter protocols, placed a hard freeze on any power of attorney requests unless I appeared in person, and set up automatic payments so no late bill could be twisted into proof of incompetence. Fear is loud, Frank always said, but competence speaks softer and carries farther. By 10:30 a.m., I was seated in the corner of a coffee shop, the rain tapping against the glass, while Ray Collins slid into the chair across from me. His black notebook lay on the table, the same kind he'd carried when he and Frank worked homicide, and his eyes scanned the room with a detective's reflex door frames, sightlines, exits. "You look like you haven't slept," he said, and there was no pity in it, only readiness. I laid everything out for him in a steady cadence, just as Frank once rehearsed testimony at our kitchen table. The new medication, the fog that passed the false reports, Brandon delivered to Sarah every night. The whisper I overheard at 2:47 a.m. about hearings and policies. The life insurance Brandon quoted down to the penny. The texts I'd photographed, the commitment papers, the 6-month window for the other matter. Ray read every image on my phone with the stillness of a man who let silence do half the work. At last, he said, "He drugged your coffee. He wanted the side effects to look like age." I nodded, and for a flicker, his jaw tightened with rage, then reset to the discipline years on the force had drilled into him. He made 3 calls, his voice low and precise. One to a detective he had mentored who now worked statewide elder exploitation cases. Another to a prosecutor known for moving quickly when the vulnerable were in danger. The third to a clerk who could slip a word to the right judge without tipping off the quarry. He didn't promise miracles. He promised procedure with teeth. By 1 p.m., I was back home with groceries I didn't need, and an expression I'd practiced in the mirror, vague, grateful, a little lost. Brandon returned, almost to the tick rain sliding off his jacket, and asked if I had napped. I did, I told him. He nodded, pleased, as if approving a child's compliance, then disappeared into his office for one of his long calls behind a closed door. I watered the roses, laid out a fresh towel across the banister upstairs, knowing he would forget one and come looking. The house felt like a stage before opening night props waiting in place, the actors rehearsing their first lines. That evening, his voice droned from the study, the scratch of his pen, dragging across forms I knew he had no right to fill. I sat beneath Frank's photo and felt the house pulse with expectation. At 6 a.m. Thursday, the sun broke through heavy clouds, filling the kitchen with a cheer as false as Brandon's smile. "Big day," he said, watching the coffee bloom in the cup, like a prize he'd cultivated. "Very big," I answered, letting my voice tremble just enough to give him satisfaction. His phone buzzed with a message, and he smiled at the screen. "Dr. Peterson will meet us at 10 a.m. sharp." He checked his watch, hummed the victory tune under his breath, and carried his speaker upstairs. The pipes roared with shower water at 8:15 a.m. I sent Ray a single text, "Curtains up." His reply came one word, "moving." 10 minutes later, the driveway filled with quiet engines. The first to step through the door was a tall woman in a crisp uniform, Detective Alvarez, her gaze sweeping the room with quick calculation. Behind her came Detective Patterson with a compact recording kit, and then Ray himself, jaw set, eyes locked steady as the day I'd first met him. "You ready?" he asked. To my own surprise, I was. Ready and almost light with the relief of truth about to be spoken aloud. From upstairs came Brandon's buoyant call through the steam. "Margaret, did I leave a towel out there?" I stepped toward the linen closet, glanced at Detective Alvarez, and turned the deadbolt Frank had installed years ago on the outside of the bathroom door. It clicked with a quiet finality that made Ray's mouth twitch, as though he was holding back a toast. Mr. Hayes Alvarez called her badge level, her voice calm. "This is Detective Alvarez with the county police. We need to ask you some questions." The shower cut off. Silence pooled beneath the door, then the rattle of a handle that refused to turn. "Margaret!" He snapped the warmth. "Gone open this door." I stepped back, the old fear fluttering and then lifting like a curtain. "Not today," I said, surprised at the steadiness of my own voice. "Today we're going to listen." The handle rattled again, harder this time. Brandon tried irritation, then reason, then a half-hearted laugh. His entire repertoire of control unspooled in a matter of minutes, bouncing uselessly against the locked door. Detective Patterson lifted his recorder, the small red light steady as truth. Ray crossed his arms and positioned himself where Brandon would see him first when the door finally opened. From outside came the sound of tires on gravel. Another car door slammed, footsteps hurried up the walk. At 9 a.m., Sarah's keys scraped in the lock, that familiar rhythm a mother knows like her own heartbeat. She burst inside in her hospital scrubs, alarm flashing in her eyes. "Mom, what's going on?" she demanded, gaze darting between me, the detectives, and the shut bathroom door where fists now pounded in angry rhythm. I caught her hands before she could move further. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice cracking, "once you need to look at something and listen all the way through." From behind the door, Brandon shouted, desperate. "She's confused again. She's having another episode. Don't listen to her." His voice cracked under the strain, the practiced calm unraveling into sharp edges. Every fracture confirmed what I had heard in the dark kitchen days earlier. Detective Patterson handed Sarah a tablet. On the screen glowed the photos I had taken, Brandon's call logs, the text messages, the plans laid out with clinical cruelty. Sarah scrolled, lips parting as she read aloud. "Package delivered as promised. Properly confused within 72 hours. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "Mom, he was drugging you." Brandon slammed his fist against the door, voice cracking into panic. "Sarah, don't listen to them. You know me, you love me. They're twisting everything. Think of all our plans." She scrolled further, reading in a whisper that broke on every word. Commitment papers filed under emergency provisions. Sympathetic judge. Once declared incompetent, how soon can we move forward with the other matter? Her voice faltered. The other matter, she repeated, clutching the tablet against her chest. He meant killing you. I cupped her face the way I had when she was small, feverish in the night. Yes, sweetheart. He wanted me gone, and he made sure you believed it was for my own safety. Brandon's voice dropped lower, silky and poisonous. Sarah, you have to believe me. Your mother's sick. Paranoia delusions. Dr. Peterson explained everything. They're using her confusion to destroy us. Open this door and we can start fresh. Sarah froze, torn between the man she thought she knew and the evidence glowing in her hands. Detective Alvarez stepped closer, her voice firm but gentle. Mrs. Hayes, we have the texts, the pharmacy records, and the recordings from this morning. Your husband has been systematically poisoning your mother's coffee with unauthorized sedatives. The symptoms he described were manufactured to support a fraudulent commitment case. The words hit Sarah like a blow. I saw her knees buckle, but she held steady, her nurse's discipline anchoring her body, while her heart cracked. Tears streaked her cheeks as she turned to me, the girl who once brought me fistfuls of dandelions, declaring them gold. Her eyes, though blurred with grief, were clear of doubt now. Brandon must have sensed it too. His voice turned savage. You ungrateful fool, everything you have is because of me. The house, the life, the security. Without me, you're nothing. Sarah drew a long, trembling breath. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but sharper than any shout. No, Brandon. Without you, I still have my mother, and that's everything. Detective Alvarez signaled. Patterson slid the bolt open. The door burst wide steam, billowing into the hall. Brandon lunged out in a towel, his face a grotesque mix of rage and desperation, hand outstretched towards Sarah. He didn't make it 2 steps before Alvarez intercepted him, badge gleaming, cuffs in hand. Brandon Hayes. She declared, her tone ringing with finality. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted murder, and elder abuse. The cuffs clicked around his wrists, cold and final. He twisted, tried to catch Sarah's eyes, but she turned away, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Sarah, please, he shouted as they dragged him down the hall. Don't throw everything away over her lies. She spun back, fury blazing through her tears. Future, she shouted. You were planning a future without my mother in it. That's not a future, that's a grave. The detectives hauled him out into the rain, his protests drowned by the wail of the squad car siren. Silence fell heavy once he was gone, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock and Sarah's uneven breathing. She dropped the tablet onto the table and collapsed into a chair, covering her face with her hands. How could I not see it? She whispered. How did I live beside that man and never see who he really was? I sat beside her, rubbing slow circles on her back like I had when thunderstorms frightened her as a child. Because you loved him, I said softly, and predators use love as camouflage. It isn't your fault, Sarah. It's his. Ray stepped back inside from the porch, rain dripping from his jacket. He'll be looking at 25 to life, he said evenly, and Peterson won't be far behind. They'll both answer for this. He poured us each a cup of coffee, the steam rising steady where lies once filled the air. Sarah wiped her eyes, still trembling, but steadier now. I almost let him take you from me. But you didn't, I reminded her gently. When you saw the truth, you chose me. That's what matters. The storm outside softened the sound of rain easing into quiet. For the first time in months, I felt the house exhale. Brandon's game was over. But our story, mine and Sarah's, was still being written. 6 months later, the courthouse was packed. Reporters whispered in the aisles, pens, scratching against notepads, while the weight of legal papers rustled like restless wings. I sat quietly on a wooden bench, Frank's photo tucked in my purse, watching Brandon at the defense table. He wore a tailored suit that looked borrowed, his posture, stiff eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. Beside him sat Dr. Peterson, pale and sweating through his collar, his own lawyer whispering into his ear. The air was thick with expectation. The prosecutor rose and laid out the case with devastating precision. Every piece of evidence came like a hammer. The text messages I had photographed, the pharmacy records showing unauthorized sedatives, the intercepted late-night calls, and the commitment papers filled out under false pretenses. Sarah's testimony carried the most weight, trembling voice breaking only once she described the man she had trusted. The gradual gaslighting, the way his reports of my supposed decline had woven a net around her exhaustion until she almost believed him. Her heartbreak filled the courtroom, but so did her courage. When the jury filed back in silence, pressed down until even the sound of shoes scuffing against the floor felt loud. "Guilty on all counts," the foreman announced. Brandon's face went slack as if the mask he had worn for years had finally cracked beyond repair. Peterson's lawyer closed his eyes like a man watching a ship sink. The judge's voice cut through the air, stern and certain. Brandon Hayes was sentenced to 30 years to life in prison. Dr. Peterson received 15 years stripped forever of his medical license. Justice Frank used to say, "is slow but heavy. When it lands with both feet." As I watched them led away in shackles, I felt no triumph, only the release of a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. Sarah filed for divorce the very next morning. Her ring sat on the dresser in a neat little box, and she threw herself into therapy with the same determination she once brought to nursing school. She confessed more than once that she felt foolish, that she should have seen the warning signs. I reminded her gently that skilled manipulators thrive by convincing good people their instincts are wrong. Brandon had studied her exhaustion, her kindness, and her blind spots the way a hunter studies a map. That wasn't her blindness, it was his design. Slowly, life reshaped itself. Sarah moved back into her old bedroom for a time, the walls familiar, but changed a space that became healing ground for both of us. We fell into new rhythms, coffee at the kitchen table in the morning-evening walks under the maples, soft conversations on the porch as the sun sank low. For the first time in years, the house felt as though it could breathe again. The media caught wind of our story. Letters began arriving from across the country, handwritten notes and emails from strangers who had faced similar predators. Elderly people who had lost their savings to exploitation, adult children who had ignored subtle shifts in behavior until it was too late. They told me our ordeal had opened their eyes, that they would talk more openly with their families about money, health, and trust. Some said they had called their banks that very week, tightening their own protections. Our nightmare, it seemed, was lighting lanterns for others. One evening, Sarah sat beside me on the porch watching the sky bloom pink and gold over the rooftops. She asked me if she would ever trust another man again. Her voice was small, hesitant, as if speaking the question out loud might wound her further. I told her what her therapist had already said, that the first trust she needed to rebuild was the one with herself. Brandon had forced her to doubt her instincts, but those instincts had spoken even in the early days when he rushed to control their finances and decisions. That wasn't paranoia, I told her. That was intuition. Next time you'll listen to it. Next time you'll know. She nodded, shoulders straightening, and for the first time since the arrest, I saw her strength settle back into place. "I think I'm starting to," she whispered. That was enough for me. Weeks turned into months. The sharp edges of fear softened. Sometimes I still startled passing a brochure stand at the doctor's office or hearing the creak of the floorboards late at night. But the grip of fear loosened quickly, each time replaced by laughter with Sarah, by the scent of roses, Frank once tended, by the quiet satisfaction of having faced a predator head-on and survived. One night, Sarah reached across the porch swing and took my hand. "Thank you for being stronger than him," she whispered. I laughed softly, though it came from a deep place of truth. "Sweetheart, I said, "Your father taught me long ago how to deal with dangerous men." Brandon made one fatal mistake. He underestimated me. He thought age meant helplessness, confusion meant weakness, and love meant surrender. He was wrong about all of it. Above us, the stars spread wide and bright. For the first time in a long time, I felt calm settle into my chest like it belonged there. Brandon was where he belonged. Peterson had been exposed. Sarah was finding her way back to herself. The story we carried was heavy, yes, but it was ours, and we had survived it together. If my story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe so more people can hear it. And if you have ever faced betrayal or fought for your truth, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters more than you know.